I rented a room in my house to a young woman named Mara because I was tired of the sound of my own footsteps being the only sound in the hallway. She was 34, quiet, neat, paid 2 months in advance without being asked. She cooked her own meals, kept her door closed, said good morning with the careful politeness of someone who understands that proximity is not the same as intimacy. She was, by every observable measure, the ideal tenant. 8 weeks after she moved in, I mentioned, in passing, the name of the street where I had grown up. She said, Clover Mill Road. Yes, your family moved there when you were 9. I had not told her the name of the street. I had not told her I had grown up anywhere in particular. I had not told her I moved there at 9. I looked at her across the kitchen, and she looked back at me with the composed expression of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment for a very long time. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 62 years old and I live in Connecticut. I have been through a great deal in the past 2 years. I have discovered things, investigated things, sat in conference rooms and courtrooms and gardens while the full picture of a life I thought I understood assembled itself into something entirely different. I had believed, by the time I posted the room for rent, that I was done being surprised. Mara surprised me. If this story stays with you, please subscribe and leave me a comment below. Tell me what city you are watching from. I read every single one. Now let me tell you what she was looking for. And what I found when I helped her look. I had posted the room in April. Not for the money, the civil recovery had produced enough to sustain me comfortably for the remainder of my life, and I was not in the habit of deceiving myself about my motivations. I posted it because the house had 2 unused bedrooms and one of them faced the garden and had good morning light, and the idea of that light falling on empty furniture every day felt like a small but persistent waste. And because the hallway was quiet in the way that hallways become quiet when there is only one person in a house, and that person is aware of being only one person. I had lived alone before, the first months after Thomas died, before the discoveries had reorganized everything. Before the legal proceedings had introduced Patricia and Agent Torres and Sandra into my daily life in ways that created a kind of company even if it was not the kind you choose. Now that the proceedings were largely complete and the circle of people who required my regular attention had settled into something manageable and pleasant, the house had become noticeably quiet again. I screened 12 applications. Mara's was the 9th. She was 34. She worked remotely as a data analyst for a consulting firm. Her references were from 2 previous landlords, both in different states, both of whom said she was quiet, responsible, and left the property in better condition than she found it. She had no criminal history. She had good credit. She came to view the room on a Wednesday afternoon and was careful about everything. She asked intelligent questions about the lease terms, the shared spaces, the parking, the internet connection. She did not ask about me. I noticed this only afterward, when I was reviewing my notes on the 12 applicants. Every other candidate had asked something personal, how long I had lived there, whether I had children, what I did with my time. The natural human curiosity of someone assessing whether they want to share a living space with a stranger. Mara asked nothing about me. At the time I had read this as self-contained professionalism. The kind of discretion I actually preferred in a tenant, someone who respected the boundary between shared space and private life. I offered her the room. She paid 2 months in advance and moved in on a Saturday with 2 suitcases and 4 boxes of books. The first weeks were exactly what she had presented herself as. She cooked in the evenings and the kitchen smelled of things I didn't always recognize, cumin, something sharp and citrus, bread on Sundays that she left a portion of outside my door without comment. She was in her room by 10 most nights. She went for walks in the early morning before I was awake. She read on the back porch in the afternoons when the light was right. We had the occasional kitchen conversation. Not long ones. The kind that develop naturally when 2 people share a space and occasionally occupy it simultaneously. Comments about the weather, about a book she was reading, about the garden. She had opinions about the garden. Thoughtful ones. She knew the names of things I had planted and things I had not planted, but which had arrived anyway, the way things arrive in gardens when conditions suit them. I found her company agreeable in exactly the proportion I had hoped for. Not too much. Not too little. The right weight of another person in a house. 8 weeks in, On a Tuesday morning, she was at the kitchen table with her coffee when I came downstairs. I was telling her about a walk I had taken the previous afternoon through a neighborhood I had lived in as a child. I mentioned it in passing. I had been on that side of town for an errand and had driven through on an impulse. I said, I grew up near there. Old neighborhood. She said, Clover Mill Road. Yes. Your family moved there when you were 9. And the kitchen became a different room entirely. I did not respond immediately. I have learned, over 2 years of discoveries that arrived without warning, to pause before responding to things I do not yet understand. The pause allows me to assess what I know and what I don't know and what the appropriate next move is. In the early months, the pause was something I had to impose deliberately. Now it comes more naturally. I set my coffee cup down on the counter. I said, I didn't tell you the name of the street. She said, no. I said, I didn't tell you I moved there at 9. She said, no. I said, how do you know these things? She put her coffee cup down too, mirroring the gesture with the particular self-awareness of someone who has been waiting for this conversation and is now deciding exactly how to enter it. She said, I know a great many things about you. I have spent considerable time learning them. I want to be honest with you about that because the alternative is for you to discover it piecemeal and to feel deceived, which is not what I intended. I said, what else do you know? She said, your favorite coffee is a medium roast from a specific farm in Guatemala that you order online every 6 weeks. Your secondary school English teacher was a woman named Mrs. Patricia Dunn who you credit in an interview you gave to a teaching journal in 2003 with making you love literature. You have a scar on your left hand from a kitchen accident when you were 31. You kept a diary from age 14 to age 22 and stopped the year you married. The kitchen was very quiet. She said, I know about the past 2 years. The storage unit. The legal proceedings. Some of what you found. I know about Lucas. I know about the women connected to your husband's other lives. I said, who are you? She said, my name is actually Mara. That part was true. My last name is not what I put on the application. I apologize for that. I needed to get into this house, and I was not certain you would agree to meet me if I approached you directly. I said, why did you need to get into this house? She said, because you are the only person I have been able to identify who has the specific combination of legal resources, investigative experience, and connection to the network of people involved that might help me find my mother. I looked at her. She was 34 years old. Dark hair, serious eyes, the particular composure of someone who has organized themselves around a purpose for a long time and has become efficient at carrying it. I said, your mother. She said, she disappeared 18 years ago. I was 16. She left one morning and did not come back. The police investigated. They found nothing. The case went cold. I have been looking for her since I was old enough to look. I said, what does your mother have to do with me? She said, her name was Catherine Reyes. She was 41 when she disappeared. She had been in a relationship for approximately 3 years before she vanished. A relationship she kept private from me and from everyone in her life. I found out about it only after she was gone, from a letter she left that I found when I was going through her things. She said, the man she was seeing was a lawyer. Family law. Connecticut. She described him in the letter as careful, attentive, someone who understood her in ways she had not expected. The particular cold that I had learned to recognize over 2 years settled into the kitchen. I said, what year did your mother disappear? She said the year. 16 years into my marriage to Thomas. I said, and the lawyer. Did she give his name in the letter? She said, she called him Daniel. Daniel. Thomas's false identity. The name he had used with Catherine, with the passport, with the Lisbon ticket. I sat down at the kitchen table. I said, how did you connect Daniel to me? She said, I have been investigating for 6 years. Seriously investigating, with all the resources I could bring to it. I am good at finding information. It is what I do professionally, and I have applied everything I know to this. 18 months ago, I found a name in a document connected to a civil fraud case in Connecticut. Daniel Mercer. It matched the name and description from my mother's letter closely enough to pursue. She said, the civil case led me to the criminal proceedings. To your husband's name. To you. I said, "You have been investigating for a year and a half." She said, "Yes." I said, "And in that time you identified me, learned everything you could find about my life, waited for me to post a room for rent, applied under a false name, and moved into my house." She said, "Yes." I said, "Because you needed my help." She said, "Because I needed your help and because I needed to know, first, whether you were someone I could trust." I could not know that from a distance. I had to be in a room with you consistently over time to understand the kind of person you are. I looked at her. I said, "And?" She said, "And you are exactly who the record suggested you were. You are thorough and fair, and you do not flinch from difficult information. You are the person I came here to find." I sat at the kitchen table that Mara had eaten breakfast at every morning for 8 weeks and looked at the woman I had rented a room to because I was tired of the sound of my own footsteps. I said, "Tell me everything you know about your mother." She said, "I'll get my files." She was back in 4 minutes with a box organized, labeled, the work of years of careful and determined searching. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. Catherine Reyes had been 41 when she disappeared. A graphic designer, freelance, working from her apartment. Single mother since Mara was 2, after a divorce that Mara described as uncomplicated. Her parents had simply stopped working as a couple and had separated without acrimony. Her father had moved to California. He and Catherine had maintained a cordial relationship for Mara's sake. Catherine had been, by every account Mara had gathered, a woman of considerable capability and independence. She had built a small but solid freelance practice. She had owned her apartment. She had a group of friends she saw regularly, a book club, a community garden plot she tended every weekend. And then, approximately 3 years before she disappeared, she had started seeing someone she did not introduce to anyone. Her friends had noticed she seemed happier, more settled. The particular quality of happiness, several of them told Mara during her investigations, that comes from a relationship that feels substantial and real. But when they asked Catherine about it, she deflected. He was private, she said. He had complicated family circumstances. She respected that. And then one morning she did not wake Mara for school. And the apartment was empty. And the letter was on the kitchen table. Mara had read it at 16 and understood approximately half of what it contained. She had read it again at 20 and understood more. She had read it at 28 and understood most of it. She had read it last week and understood all of it. She handed it to me now. Catherine had written to her daughter that she was leaving. That she was going somewhere she could not yet describe. That the man she loved had a situation that required patience and time, but that she believed, finally, they were close to resolving it. That she would contact Mara as soon as she was able. That she was sorry. That she loved her more than she could say on paper. She had never contacted Mara. In 18 years, not a call, not a letter, not a single word. I set the letter down. I said, "The name Daniel." In the letter. What exactly did she say about him? Mara found the specific passage. Catherine had written, "Daniel is a careful man in the way that people are careful when they have learned that careless costs too much. He has a life that is complicated in ways I am not yet fully permitted to understand. But I understand enough. I understand that he is real and that what he feels is real and that real is what I have been waiting for." I looked at the ceiling for a moment. I thought about Thomas telling each of these women some version of the same thing. That his life was complicated. That his circumstances required patience. That what he felt was real. It had been real, in whatever way Thomas was capable of real. That was not the comfort it might have seemed. I said, "Mara, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly regardless of whether the answer is what you want." She said, "Ask." I said, "Do you believe your mother left voluntarily?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I believe she left voluntarily. The letter indicates that. But I do not know if she arrived wherever she was going. And I do not know what happened after she arrived. And those are the questions I cannot answer without help." I looked at the box of files on my kitchen table. 6 years of work. Careful, thorough, dogged. The work of a woman who had been 16 when her mother left and had spent 18 years looking. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. Patricia came the following morning. She sat across from Mara at the kitchen table with the legal pad she always brought and reviewed the documentation Mara had assembled with the focused thoroughness of a woman who has spent 2 years becoming expert in a particular network of people and is now encountering a new thread that connects to it in a way she had not anticipated. She asked Mara questions for 90 minutes. When she was satisfied, she set down her pen. She said, "The name Catherine does not appear in any of the documentation recovered from the 5 document boxes or from the storage unit or from the financial records. If she was known to Thomas as Daniel, she would not necessarily have been documented under her real name." Mara said, "She might have been documented under a city. Or a number. Or something else entirely." Patricia said, "That's possible. The documentation we recovered was organized according to Thomas's own system, which we may not have fully decoded." She looked at me. She said, "There is another consideration. Catherine Reyes disappeared 18 years ago. She was 41. She would be 59 now." Mara said, "I know." Patricia said carefully, "She may have built a new life. She may have chosen, for her own reasons, not to return. The plan she described in the letter, going somewhere with Daniel while circumstances resolved, may have resolved in ways that meant she could not or chose not to reach out." Mara said, "I know that too. I am not looking for a reconciliation. I am looking for an answer. Whether she is alive or not. Where she went. What happened. I am 34 years old. I have been waiting 18 years. I would like to know before I am waiting for 30. The kitchen was quiet. I said, "Sandra." Patricia nodded. Sandra came 2 days later with her laptop and her particular quality of methodical efficiency. She reviewed Mara's files, cross-referenced them against everything she had assembled during the 2 years of the original investigation, and ran the name Catherine Reyes through every database and record system available to her. It took her 4 hours. Then she called me and Patricia and Mara into the kitchen. She said, "Catherine Reyes appears in the civil court records from the asset recovery proceedings. Not under her real name. Under a designation used in the financial documentation, a reference code Thomas used for women connected to the Daniel Mercer identity during a specific period." She said, "Based on the dates and the geographic markers in the financial records, Catherine Reyes was one of the women Thomas was seeing during the period before the 4 we identified. She was earlier. She predates Catherine, the Catherine we knew, by approximately 5 years." Mara was very still. Sandra said, "There are wire transfers connected to her reference code. Payments into an account. The account is in a jurisdiction we had not previously examined because it fell outside the primary investigation period." She said, "The account is still active." Mara made a sound. Not a word. A sound. The specific exhale of someone who has been holding something for 18 years and has just been given the first concrete confirmation that the thing they have been holding was real all along. I said, "Active as in receiving payments." Sandra said, "Active as in the account exists and has not been closed. Whether it is being accessed we do not yet know." Patricia said, "I am going to need to involve Agent Torres. This crosses into territory that requires formal investigation." Mara said, "Whatever it takes." Agent Torres was in the kitchen by the following afternoon. She reviewed everything. She made calls. She brought in resources from the federal investigation that had been technically concluded, but which, as she put it, had a supplementary dimension that could justify continued attention. The account traced to a woman. A woman living in a coastal town in Portugal. Not Lisbon. A smaller town. The kind of place where a person can build a quiet, unremarkable life without attracting the attention that a city requires you to repel. The woman was 59 years old. She had been living there for 17 years. Under her own name. Catherine Reyes. Mara sat at my kitchen table and learned that her mother was alive. She sat with this information for perhaps 2 minutes. Then she said, "Does she know I've been looking?" Agent Torres said, "We don't know what she knows. We know where she is." Mara said, "Does she have to be told it was me who found her? Or could she be approached in a way that gives her a choice?" I looked at the 34-year-old woman across the table who had spent 6 years hunting for her mother and who, having found her, was asking whether her mother could be given the dignity of choosing what came next. I said, "Patricia, How do we do this in a way that's right? Patricia said, carefully. The way we do everything. The approach to Catherine took 3 weeks to arrange. Not because of legal complexity, Catherine had not committed any crime by leaving. She had been an adult who had chosen to go somewhere and build a different life. The criminal dimensions of the situation, if any existed, related to Thomas and to the financial arrangements he had made, not to Catherine's decision to disappear. The 3 weeks were because of Mara. She wanted to write a letter first. Before anyone contacted Catherine officially. Before Agent Torres made any formal inquiry. She wanted her mother to have the chance to read her daughter's words before she had to respond to anything. She wrote and rewrote the letter for 10 days. I know this because she wrote it at my kitchen table. She did not ask permission to do this. She simply appeared one morning with her coffee and her notebook and began writing. And I passed through the kitchen several times over those 10 days, and sometimes she was writing, and sometimes she was staring at the garden, and sometimes she had written something and crossed it all out and started again. I did not read over her shoulder. I left her coffee on the table when I passed and did not comment on what she was doing. On the 10th day, she printed the final version and sealed it in an envelope. She said, "Is it all right if I send it from your address? I don't want to give her mine until she's ready." I said, yes. The letter went to Portugal. Agent Torres had arranged for a local contact to deliver it by hand to the address where Catherine was living, a small house near the water with a garden, according to the contact's brief description. The contact was instructed only to deliver it and confirm receipt. Nothing else. Catherine received the letter on a Thursday morning. Mara and I spent most of that Thursday in the kitchen. Not together exactly. She was at the table with her work laptop. I was gardening and coming in periodically for water. But together in the way that people are together when they are occupying the same space for the same reason without naming it. The call came on Saturday. I was in the garden when I heard Mara's phone ring inside. I heard her answer. I heard the quality of the silence that followed, not a speaking silence, an absorbing silence, the silence of someone receiving something large and trying to hold it. I stayed in the garden. She came out 40 minutes later. She sat down on the garden wall and looked at the tulips for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "She's alive. She's well. She has a life there. She has a garden." She said the first thing she thought when she read my letter was that she had been thinking of writing to me for years and had never found the courage. I said, "And?" She said, "And she is sorry." She said it many times. She said she believed, when she left, that she was going toward something real and that she would send for me once she was settled. And then Daniel, she called him Daniel, died before the plan was complete. And she was in Portugal with nothing and no one, and she had told herself she would come back when she had something to offer. And then a year became 2 and 2 became 5, and at some point she understood that the window for coming back had closed and that crossing back through it would cause more pain than staying away. Mara was quiet for a moment. She said, "I told her that was wrong. That it had always been wrong. That there was no window. That a daughter does not stop needing her mother because time passes." She said, she cried. She said she knew. I looked at the tulips. I said, "What happens now?" She said, she wants to meet. She asked if I would come to Portugal. I said I would go anywhere. She paused. She said, she asked who helped me find her. I told her about you. About the past 2 years and what you went through and how the network of people connected to Daniel led back to everything. She said, "My mother asked if she could write to you." I was quiet for a moment. I said, "Yes. Tell her yes." Catherine's letter arrived 2 weeks later. Handwritten, for pages, in a script that suggested someone who had been taught to write carefully and had continued doing so for 59 years. She wrote about Daniel. About what she had believed about him and what she understood now. About the way a man who paid complete attention could make you believe you were the only person he was paying attention to. And how the years after his death had produced a slow and reluctant understanding that the life she had gone toward had been more complicated than she had known. She wrote, "I did not know about you. I want you to know that. I did not know you existed. If I had known I would have." She crossed something out here and rewrote it. I cannot say with certainty what I would have done. but I would have known. And knowing changes things even when we do not act on what we know. She wrote, I am sorry for what he was and for the part his life in my world played in yours. That is an inadequate sentence for an inadequate situation. It is the best I can offer. I read the letter twice. Then I wrote back. I wrote, what he was to both of us was real, in the only way he was capable of real. That is not comfort. It is simply what I have arrived at after 2 years of looking directly at all of it. I hope Portugal is good to you. I hope your garden is better than you expected. I hope Mara is everything you forgot she was. Mara flew to Lisbon 3 weeks later. She did not ask me to come. She understood, I think, that this particular reunion did not need witnesses. She texted me from the airport, thank you. For the room. For everything. I texted back, let me know how the garden is. She sent a photo 2 days later. 2 women in a garden near water. 1:34. 1:59. Both of them smiling in the particular way of people who have found something they were not certain they would ever find. It is May. 25 months since Thomas died. 3 months since a woman sat across from me in this kitchen and told me she had been studying me for a year before renting a room in my house. Mara is still in Portugal. She did not come back for her things. She arranged for them to be shipped, a brief text message, an apology for the inconvenience, a question about whether I had found another tenant yet. I had not. I had not even posted the room again. I was not certain I wanted to. She texted last week. She said the town where her mother lives is small and the bakeries are extraordinary, and she is working remotely from a terrace that overlooks the water, and she has started learning Portuguese with the determination of someone who intends to stay for a while. She said, I don't know if what my mother and I have now is what it would have been. But it is something. And something is what I came here for. I wrote back, something is enough. I have learned that. The room with the garden view and the good morning light is empty. I walk past it sometimes. The light does fall on the furniture, the way I had imagined it would when I posted the room in April. It is not wasted. Things that fall on surfaces without purpose are not wasted. They simply are. Lucas asked me last Sunday whether I found the situation with Mara frightening. The fact that she had studied me for a year. That she had moved into my house under a false name. That she had known things about my private life that I had not shared. I thought about it. I said, it should have been frightening and it was not. And I have been trying to understand why. I think the answer is that Mara's knowledge of me was built out of respect rather than surveillance. She studied me the way you study something you need to understand in order to approach it correctly. She was not watching me to control anything. She was watching me to learn whether I was safe. The distinction matters. Lucas was quiet for a moment. He said, do you think she would have told you eventually? If you hadn't noticed the street name? I said, yes. I think she was always going to tell me. The study period was about readiness, hers and mine. She needed to understand who I was before she asked for my help. And she needed to know I was ready to receive what she had to tell me. He said, and were you? I said, I think I was exactly ready. If you are watching this and you are in the process of looking for someone, a parent, a child, a person who mattered and disappeared, I want to say this. The looking is worth doing. Not because it always ends with the reunion you imagined. Not because finding someone means recovering what was lost. But because not knowing is its own particular weight, and knowing, even when the knowing is complicated, is lighter. Mara looked for 18 years. She is on a terrace in Portugal with her coffee and her laptop, and a mother. She is still learning who she is now. The looking was worth it. I am 62 years old. A stranger moved into my house and knew things I had never told her. She had come for help and I had given it. And out of that, out of a false name on a rental application and a street name I mentioned in passing, a daughter found her mother. The room is empty. The garden is in May. That is enough for today. Leave me a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if you have ever helped someone find something they had been looking for a long time. Tell me what it cost you and what it gave you. I read every single one.